What happened to Jesus during the missing years? How is it possible that the most influential figure in human history appears in the Gospels as a child, then suddenly vanishes from the record for nearly 2 decades, only to return as a man speaking with astonishing authority, confronting religious leaders, and changing the world forever? Why does Scripture tell us about Jesus at around age 12, then remain almost completely silent until he appears again at about 30 years old? Were those years ordinary, hidden, deliberately forgotten? Or do they conceal one of the greatest mysteries in biblical history? For centuries, people have asked the same unsettling question: where was Jesus between the ages of 12 and 30? Some say he remained in Nazareth, living a quiet and simple life. Others claim he traveled to Egypt, to the desert, even to India or Tibet, studying hidden wisdom before beginning his ministry. And then there are those who believe the silence itself is the message, that these years were never meant to satisfy human curiosity, but to reveal something deeper about preparation, timing, and the hidden ways of God. Tonight, we are entering one of the most fascinating mysteries surrounding the life of Christ. We are going to examine what the Bible actually says, what it does not say, why these years are missing from the gospel record, and what the most serious theories suggest about the so-called lost years of Jesus. Before we go deeper, subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and tell me in the comments right now, do you believe the hidden years of Jesus were simply quiet years in Nazareth? Or do you think there is more to the story than history has preserved? I want to hear your view before we uncover the mystery. Because once you look closely at the silence surrounding these years, it becomes clear that the mystery is not only where Jesus was, but why the silence exists at all. The gospel accounts give us just enough to feel the weight of what is missing. In Luke chapter 2, Jesus appears as a boy in Jerusalem during Passover. He is around 12 years old. When his parents return home, they realize he is not with them. After searching anxiously, they find him in the temple, sitting among the teachers, listening, asking questions, and astonishing those around him with his understanding. It is one of the first clear windows into his identity. Even at that young age, there is already something extraordinary in him, an awareness, a gravity, a wisdom beyond expectation. And then, almost immediately, the curtain closes. Luke tells us that Jesus returned with Mary and Joseph to Nazareth and was obedient to them. Then comes one of the most quietly powerful lines in the entire gospel record: and Jesus increased in wisdom and stature, and in favor with God and man. After that, silence. The next major moment comes in Luke chapter 3, where Jesus appears again at about 30 years of age, stepping into public ministry, approaching the Jordan, and beginning the mission that would transform history. From 12 to 30, the Gospels say almost nothing. That gap has captivated believers, skeptics, historians, and storytellers for generations. Why would the New Testament leave so much unrecorded? If the early life of Jesus mattered, why not describe his adolescence, his young adulthood, his work, his relationships, his daily life? Why leave nearly 18 years in shadow? The most sober answer is also the simplest one: because the gospel writers were not trying to produce a modern biography. That is one of the first truths we have to remember. The Gospels are not designed to satisfy every historical curiosity. They are theological narratives centered on the identity, mission, death, and resurrection of Christ. Their goal is not to tell us everything Jesus ever did. Their goal is to tell us what we need to know about who he is. And yet, the silence still invites the question. So let us begin with the most grounded and historically responsible theory. The first and most widely accepted view is that Jesus remained in Nazareth, living an ordinary hidden life until the appointed time of his public ministry. This view may sound less dramatic than exotic travel theories, but it is deeply powerful. Nazareth was not a center of fame or influence. It was a small and seemingly insignificant village. To spend those years there would mean that Jesus, before preaching to crowds or performing miracles, lived in obscurity. He would have grown physically, emotionally, socially, and spiritually within an ordinary household. He would have known work, routine, discipline, patience, and the slow unfolding of daily life. Traditionally, Jesus is associated with the trade of a craftsman. The Greek term, often translated carpenter, can also suggest a builder or artisan, someone who worked with wood, stone, or practical construction. If that is the case, then the hands that would later touch the sick and bless the broken may have spent years shaping beams, lifting tools, repairing structures, and living the demanding rhythm of common labor. That matters more than many people realize. Because it means the silence was not empty, it was full of formation. These may have been the years in which Jesus embraced the hidden life before the public one, the years of submission before declaration, the years of work before wonder, the years in which heaven's appointed king lived without visible crown, without public platform, without recorded miracle, and without applause. There is also another important possibility within this same grounded view. After the temple account in Luke 2, Joseph disappears from the gospel record. He is present in the childhood narratives, but later he is absent. Many scholars believe Joseph may have died before Jesus began his public ministry. If that is true, then Jesus may have carried family responsibilities during his hidden years, helping provide for Mary and the household. This would mean those lost years were not years of inactivity, but years of duty, burden, care, and quiet faithfulness. That possibility makes the silence even more meaningful. It suggests that before Jesus carried the weight of the cross, he may have carried the weight of ordinary responsibility. Before speaking to nations, he may have served a home. Before becoming publicly known, he may have fully entered the unnoticed struggles of human life. But because the silence is so wide, other theories emerged. One of the most famous claims is that Jesus traveled to the east during his hidden years, to India, Tibet, or other regions, where he supposedly learned spiritual wisdom before returning to Judea. This theory has fascinated modern audiences because it feels dramatic and forbidden. It imagines Jesus as a seeker, moving through distant lands, absorbing ancient teachings, then returning with the spiritual insight that shaped his message. Some versions of this story are linked to late and highly disputed writings, especially 19th century claims about manuscripts describing Isa, said to be Jesus in the East. But here we need to be careful. There is no reliable historical evidence from the canonical Gospels or the earliest Christian sources that Jesus traveled to India or Tibet. The idea is intriguing, but it rests on speculative material, late traditions, and claims that have not convinced serious historians. It makes for a compelling mystery, but not for a firm conclusion. And there is another reason many find this theory unconvincing. The teachings of Jesus are deeply rooted in the soil of Israel's scriptures. His language, his symbolism, his arguments, his conflicts, his fulfillment of prophecy, all of it emerges powerfully from the world of the Hebrew Bible. He does not sound like a teacher borrowing foreign systems and repackaging them. He sounds like the one standing inside the story of Israel and bringing it to its climax. That does not make the travel theories impossible in an absolute sense, but it does make them historically fragile. Another theory suggests that Jesus spent time in Egypt. This idea is sometimes connected to the fact that Mary, Joseph, and Jesus fled to Egypt when he was still very young to escape Herod. From there, some speculate that Jesus later returned to Egypt for study, possibly encountering Jewish communities or traditions outside Judea. Egypt was a major center of learning, and there were large Jewish populations there, especially in places like Alexandria. Again, the problem is not that the theory is impossible. The problem is that Scripture gives no evidence that this happened during the hidden years. The early flight to Egypt is part of the infancy narrative, but beyond that, the theory becomes guesswork. Then there are those who imagine that Jesus spent part of his hidden life among ascetic communities, such as the Essenes, perhaps near the desert. This theory arises because some of the themes in the world of Second Temple Judaism, purity, judgment, wilderness expectation, messianic hope, overlap in interesting ways with the environment surrounding John the Baptist and certain Jewish sects of the time. Some have wondered whether Jesus had contact with such groups, or whether those hidden years involved deep exposure to apocalyptic movements preparing for the coming kingdom. It is not a ridiculous question. The world Jesus entered was full of spiritual tension, expectation, and competing visions of holiness. But once again, the evidence is thin. The Gospels never placed Jesus among the Essenes. They never describe him as belonging to a secluded order. In fact, when Jesus begins his ministry, he often looks strikingly different from separatist movements. He moves among ordinary people, sinners, villages, homes, tables, roads, and crowds. He is holy, but not withdrawn, pure, but not isolated. So while contact with various streams of Jewish thought is certainly possible, the theory that his missing years were spent in an Essene community remains unproven, and that brings us to something deeper than all these theories. What if the most important question is not where Jesus was, but why the Gospels refuse to satisfy our curiosity? That question changes the entire conversation because the silence may be intentional. The gospel writers tell us about the virgin birth, the temple incident, the baptism, the ministry, the crucifixion, and the resurrection. They give us enough to understand his identity and mission, but they do not narrate his teenage years, his 20s, his education in detail, or the ordinary calendar of his hidden life. That omission is striking and perhaps deeply theological. Why? Because the hidden years reveal something many modern people struggle to accept. Not every season of divine purpose is public. In a world obsessed with visibility, the lost years of Jesus confront us with holiness in obscurity, growth without recognition, preparation without applause, calling without immediate platform. Think about that. The Son of God did not arrive preaching at age 13. He did not rush into public recognition. He did not spend his early years building influence. He remained hidden until the appointed time. That is not a small detail. That is part of the pattern. Luke tells us he grew in wisdom and stature and in favor with God and man. That means the years between 12 and 30 were not meaningless blank space. They were years of maturation, not moral improvement, as though Jesus moved from sin to holiness, but real human development, real embodied growth, real experience within time, family, place, and culture. This is one of the most profound dimensions of the mystery. Jesus did not merely appear as a finished public figure dropped into history. He lived through hidden years. He entered the slow and silent shape of human life. He sanctified ordinary time, and perhaps that is why the silence remains, because we are tempted to believe that only the visible years matter. Only the platform matters. Only the miracles matter. Only the public impact matters. But the hidden life of Jesus says otherwise. It says that heaven does not measure importance the way the world does. There is another reason the hidden years may remain hidden. The Gospels refuse to let curiosity overshadow mission. If the early church had wanted to fill those years with wonder stories, it easily could have. In fact, later non-canonical writings tried to do exactly that. Some apocryphal infancy Gospels describe the child Jesus performing strange miracles, dramatic acts, and supernatural displays. But these stories were not received as trustworthy scripture. In many cases, they feel speculative, exaggerated, and disconnected from the sober power of the canonical Gospels. That contrast matters. It shows that the earliest Christian community did not preserve fantasy merely because curiosity demanded it. The silence was guarded, the mystery remained, and that tells us something about the seriousness with which the Church distinguished between reverent testimony and imaginative expansion. So where was Jesus during the lost years? The most responsible answer is this. He was likely in Nazareth, living a hidden life of obedience, labor, growth, and preparation under the will of the Father. Could there be details we do not know? Certainly. Could he have traveled at some point? Possibly. Could there be pieces of history that were never preserved? Of course. But the farther we move from what the Gospels actually give us, the more cautious we must become. The mystery is real, but speculation is not the same thing as truth. And perhaps the reason this mystery continues to grip people is because the silence feels unnatural to us. We want the missing pages. We want the secret journey. We want the hidden archive. We want the revelation that explains everything. But the Gospels offer something more demanding than explanation. They offer restraint. And in that restraint, there is meaning. The lost years of Jesus remind us that God is fully at work, even when history seems quiet, even when no miracle is recorded, even when no voice from heaven is heard, even when nothing appears dramatic from the outside. That may be the greatest lesson hidden inside the mystery. Before the Sermon on the Mount, there was silence. Before the miracles, there was routine. Before the cross, there was common labor. Before the public mission, there was hidden preparation. So maybe the question is not only, where was Jesus between 12 and 30? Maybe the deeper question is this: what was God doing in the silence? And perhaps the answer is that he was doing what he often does, preparing in secret what would one day be revealed in power. That is why these missing years are so compelling, not because they invite wild fantasy, but because they confront us with a sacred hiddenness, a chapter without headlines, a season without spectacle, a holy life unfolding in the ordinary rhythm of human existence. And that makes the mystery more powerful, not less, because it means the silence was not the absence of purpose. It was purpose concealed. Now I want to hear from you. Do you believe Jesus spent those lost years living quietly in Nazareth? Or do you think there may be a forgotten part of the story that history never fully revealed? Write your view in the comments below and tell me why. I really want to know what you think about this mystery. And if you enjoy serious biblical mysteries explored with depth and respect, subscribe to the channel right now and leave a like on this video. Your support helps this project grow and allows us to keep uncovering the most mysterious and thought-provoking questions surrounding Scripture. Until the next mystery, keep reading carefully, keep questioning deeply, and remember, some of the most important things God is doing may be happening in the years no one sees.